A man returned to his quiet lake cabin with a bag of groceries in his hand. The sun was setting low across the trees, painting the water gold, and for him, it was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, nothing more, just some rest, some fishing, maybe a fire at night by the water. But as soon as he stepped out of his truck he noticed her, Karen, the HOA president, standing across the street with her arms folded tight against her chest, her eyes sharp and cold like she had been waiting for him. She wasn't smiling in a friendly way, she was smirking as if she already knew something he didn't. He frowned, adjusting the groceries in his hand, trying to ignore her. But she didn't move, she didn't even blink. Instead she lifted her phone slowly to her ear and started whispering, her voice low, urgent, and secretive, and he felt his chest tighten. Because whatever she was doing, it wasn't casual, it wasn't normal, and sure enough, within minutes the silence of the lake was shattered by the distant sound of sirens, first faint, then louder, cutting through the trees, bouncing off the water, and moving closer with every second. The man's brow furrowed as his heartbeat quickened. Why on earth would she call 911 on him? What had he done? He had just arrived, he had just parked his truck, he hadn't even stepped inside his cabin yet. He hadn't broken any rule, yet the lights were already flashing red and blue between the trees, reflecting against the water, and Karen's smirk grew wider. Her lips curling like she was savoring the moment she had created. He stood frozen for a moment, the bag of groceries heavy in his hand, as if the weight of everything had just shifted, and the peaceful weekend he had planned was gone before it had even begun. He couldn't hear exactly what she whispered into her phone, but he could see her eyes dart toward his cabin, her voice growing faster as she pointed one finger directly at him, and the man clenched his jaw, wondering if this was some sick game or if Karen had truly lost her mind. But the worst part was that the sirens weren't slowing. They were coming straight for him, straight for his driveway, and in that moment, he knew something strange was happening, something that wasn't going to end with just a simple explanation, and he whispered under his breath, "Why would she call the police? What could she possibly accuse me of?" And deep down he felt a chill crawl across his skin, because Karen wasn't just staring at him. She was staring at the cabin behind him, the place that was supposed to be safe, the place that suddenly felt like it was hiding something he couldn't see. And as the first police cruiser pulled up, lights washing over the gravel, he realized Karen wasn't acting out of panic. She was acting like someone who already knew what was inside. And that thought alone made his heart sink harder than the sound of the approaching footsteps crunching across his driveway. The flashing lights filled the quiet lakeside with chaos. Two police cruisers rolled into the gravel drive and the man stood frozen with his groceries still in his hands. The officers stepped out slowly, their flashlights already drawn as if they were entering a crime scene instead of a private cabin. And Karen was right there behind them, pointing at him with wide dramatic gestures like she had just uncovered the crime of the century. Her voice carried across the yard, loud and sharp, "That's him. That's the man. He doesn't belong here. I've told you all along something was wrong with him." And the man's fists tightened as he tried to keep calm. He spoke in a steady voice. "This is my cabin. I have the keys. I have the deed. You can check the records." But the officers didn't rush to agree. Their eyes flicked between him and Karen, unsure who was lying. The neighbors began gathering at the edge of their porches, whispering and pointing as the drama unfolded. The man felt the heat of shame burn on his neck because it looked like he was guilty of something even though he wasn't. One officer asked for his ID and he handed it over quickly, his hands shaking not from guilt but from anger. He had lived here long enough, he had paid the taxes, repaired the cabin with his own sweat. Yet here he was treated like an intruder. The officer studied the ID carefully then looked up at him. "You say this is your property?" The man nodded firmly. "Yes, my property. My name is on everything. I just came here to spend the weekend, that's all." But before the officer could answer, Karen's voice cut in again like a knife. "Ask him what's inside. Ask him what is hiding. You'll see. I've heard noises. I've seen people sneaking around that cabin at night." And the man spun to face her, his face tightening. "That's a lie. You don't know what you're talking about." But she only smiled wider as if every denial made her stronger. The officers exchanged a look and one of them asked, "Sir, do you consent to us checking inside your cabin?" And his stomach dropped. He wanted to say no, he wanted to demand a warrant. But the way the neighbors stared, the way Karen's smirk burned into him, he knew if he refused it would look worse. He tried to steady his breathing. "There's nothing to hide. This is harassment. But fine, you want to see, I'll open it for you." And he reached into his pocket for the keys, his mind racing. Why was Karen pushing so hard? What did she expect them to find? He unlocked the cabin door. The hinges creaked as it swung open and the officers stepped in first, their boots thudding against the wooden floor, their flashlights cutting through the dimness. The man followed behind them, but his steps slowed as he heard one officer pause near the hallway, tilting his head. "Did you hear that?" He whispered to his partner. A faint sound, like a floorboard shifting under weight, echoed from deeper inside. The man froze, his chest tightening. He knew he had been alone when he left. He knew. He had locked up properly, so why was there noise inside now? Karen stood outside with her arms crossed, her face glowing under the flashing red and blue, a smile playing on her lips as though she already knew who or what was going to be discovered. The officers signaled for the man to stay back as they moved carefully down the hallway, the beam of their lights sweeping across the furniture, across the photographs on the walls, until it stopped at the guest room door, slightly ajar, the same room he rarely used, and as the officer nudged it open the man's breath caught. The shadow of someone crouched low flickered in the beam. The officer shouted, "Stand up, hands where we can see them." And slowly, a figure rose from behind the bed, trembling in the sudden glare of light. The man's heart skipped a beat as recognition slammed into him. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a burglar. This was someone he knew, someone he never expected to see here. And in that instant the world tilted. Because Karen wasn't just making trouble anymore. She had forced open a secret he didn't even know he was keeping, and as the officers raised their voices and neighbors pressed closer to the windows, the man realized nothing about this night was ordinary anymore. Everything had just shifted into a dangerous game he hadn't agreed to play. The cabin air grew heavy as the figure stepped fully into the beam of the officers' flashlights. The man's pulse thundered in his ears as he recognized her, a woman he hadn't seen in months, a woman who looked worn and pale, her clothes wrinkled as if she had been living in hiding. The officers ordered her to keep her hands visible while they demanded her name. She spoke softly, her voice trembling, and it only made the tension in the room thicker. The man turned toward her in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" he asked, but she didn't answer him. Her eyes darted nervously between the officers and Karen, who stood just outside the door grinning like she had finally exposed a long-kept secret. Karen's voice was loud and cutting. "See, I told you. I knew something suspicious was happening in that cabin. I told you he wasn't alone. You should arrest him right now." She pointed her finger as though she were a prosecutor delivering the final blow in court. The neighbors outside whispered and gasped, pressing closer to the porch railings. The man's face flushed hot with both confusion and anger. He had no idea why his old friend was here, no idea how Karen even knew. But the way the officers tightened their stance told him this wasn't going to end quickly. One officer asked her directly, "Are you here by choice or against your will?" And the woman hesitated, her lips parting but no words came. Her silence seemed louder than anything else, and Karen used it like fuel, yelling. "She can't even speak because she's scared of him. She's hiding because of him. He's dangerous. You need to take him away before something worse happens." The man snapped back, his voice sharp. "That's enough, Karen, you don't know what you're talking about." But the officer raised his hand for silence, his eyes fixed on the trembling woman. "We need the truth from you," he said gently. "Are you hiding here on your own? Do you feel safe? Tell us now." The room was so quiet that even the creak of the floor seemed deafening. Finally, with a shaky breath, the woman whispered, "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just needed somewhere safe." Her words made the man's chest tighten. He wanted to ask safe from what? Safe from who? But before he could, Karen screamed, "Safe? Safe from him, that's what she means, don't you see? He's been hiding her away." The officer shot Karen a warning look. "Stay outside, this is official police business." But she kept hovering in the doorway, her smirk fading just slightly now that things weren't going exactly how she imagined. The man stepped closer, his voice steadier this time. "She is my friend. I didn't even know she was here, but if she needs help, I'll give it. You don't need to accuse me of something I haven't done." The officers exchanged glances again, their radios crackling softly on their shoulders, and one of them asked for dispatch to run the woman's name. The sound of static filled the tense silence, every second dragging longer than the last. The man could feel the neighbor's eyes drilling into his back, could see Karen pacing like a vulture waiting for the moment she could tear into his life again. Then, a faint reply came through the radio. The officer's brow furrowed as he listened, his posture shifting. He leaned closer to the device and asked for confirmation. His partner's expression hardened as he turned to the man and then to Karen. "This woman," he said carefully. "She's not wanted for a crime. She's not a runaway. She's under federal protection." The words hit the room like thunder. Karen's mouth fell open, the neighbors gasped, and the man's chest filled with shock. Federal protection. What was she hiding from? Why was she in his cabin? And why on earth did Karen know? "To send the police here tonight." The woman's eyes shimmered with fear as if the truth was too dangerous to speak out loud. And the man suddenly realized the night had shifted far beyond neighborhood drama. Karen hadn't just called the cops to annoy him. She had stumbled into something bigger, and maybe she didn't even understand how dangerous her own game had become. The officers straightened, their tone sharper now. "We're going to need to move her to a secure location," one of them said. And Karen tried to protest, yelling over them. "What do you mean? She was hiding here. She was with him. I was right, I knew it." But her voice cracked with panic this time instead of confidence. The man stood silently, gripping the edge of the doorframe, trying to make sense of it all. His peaceful weekend was gone, replaced by flashing lights, whispers of protection, and a smirk on Karen's face that now looked more like fear than triumph. And as the officers began escorting the woman out, carefully, shielding her with their bodies, the man knew deep inside that this was only the beginning. The real storm hadn't even arrived yet, and whatever secrets his friend carried, they were about to drag him into something far darker than an HOA feud by the lake. The night air outside the cabin was buzzing with voices as the officers led the trembling woman out. Neighbors pressed closer to their porches, whispering louder now. Every set of eyes locked on the strange scene unfolding by the lake. The man followed slowly, his heart pounding not only from confusion but also from the weight of knowing nothing in his life would ever be quiet again. Karen rushed forward, her heels crunching over the gravel. Her face twisted with both anger and panic. She shouted, "You can't just take her away. She was hiding here. This proves everything I said about him. Arrest him, don't let him go." But the officers stopped her cold, one holding out a hand and saying firmly, "Back up. You've interfered enough tonight." Karen froze in place, her mouth opening and closing, shocked that the authority she thought she controlled had turned against her. Her smirk was gone now, replaced with nervous twitching, her eyes darting between the officers and the woman who clutched her jacket tighter as if the world around her was closing in. The man finally found his voice and spoke, his words low but sharp. "You've gone too far this time, Karen. You had no idea what you were stirring up." And she spun to face him, her face red with fury. "Don't you dare blame me. You've been hiding her like some criminal, everyone here knows it. I've been protecting this community. I was right all along." But even the neighbors didn't look convinced anymore. Their whispers carried doubt, some shaking their heads at her, others pulling their children closer. The illusion of her control was cracking right in front of her. One officer adjusted his radio again, speaking quickly to someone on the other end, and though the man couldn't catch all the words, he heard enough. "Federal, secure transport, high priority." Those phrases cut through the night like blades. He turned to the woman, trying to read her expression. But she avoided his gaze, her lips pressed tightly shut. As if any word might trigger something worse, the officers told him to stay put, that they would handle it from here. But as they moved her toward the cruiser, Karen lunged forward again, her voice breaking with desperation. "Now, no, you can't just ignore me. She's dangerous. She's been sneaking around his cabin. She doesn't belong here." Her shrill tone made even the neighbors flinch. One officer raised his voice. "That's enough. If you interfere again, we'll remove you from the scene." And Karen stumbled back, her confidence shaken. She glared at the man with wild eyes, like someone who had just realized the trap she set for him was now snapping shut on her instead. The man stood tall despite the confusion inside him, because at least in this moment he wasn't the one who looked guilty, Karen did. And that was a shift he hadn't expected. As the woman was carefully guided into the back seat of the cruiser, she finally lifted her eyes to meet his, and though no words passed between them, there was something in that look, a silent warning, maybe even an apology, but it was clear. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't simple, it wasn't safe, and somehow his cabin had become part of it. Karen stomped her foot against the gravel, muttering under her breath, then shouted for the whole street to hear, "This isn't over, you all saw it. I was right. And when the truth comes out, you'll thank me." But her voice cracked at the edges, and for the first time, people weren't nodding. They were looking away, avoiding her eyes, embarrassed by her madness. The man exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of his jacket as the cruiser's engine started, the lights reflecting across the lake in violent flashes. He felt the ground shift under him, like the peace he once held here was slipping further out of reach. The officers promised to contact him later, told him to secure his property, and stay available. Then they pulled out slowly, taking the woman with them, leaving behind silence broken only by the nervous coughs of neighbors and the quickened breath of Karen, who stood alone now, her phone still clutched in her hand, her smirk gone completely, replaced by a mask of fear, rage, and something deeper, knowledge, because she had known this woman was here, and that question burned hotter in the man's mind than anything else. How had Karen known? Why had she been so sure? What connection did she have to his unexpected guest? The cabin loomed dark and hollow behind him as he turned back, the groceries still left in the truck, the weekend he planned shattered, and as he stepped toward the porch, Karen hissed behind him, her voice low but carrying across the gravel. You think you're safe now, but you have no idea who you're really dealing with. And the man stopped in his tracks, realizing her words weren't just spite, they were a threat. And as the lake wind swept across the night, cold and sharp, he understood that this wasn't just about an HOA feud anymore. It was about secrets, dangerous ones, and Karen wasn't going to stop until she dragged them all into the light. The man stood frozen on his porch long after the cruisers disappeared down the road, their sirens fading into the distance, leaving only the restless ripples of the lake and the hushed whispers of neighbors drifting back into their homes. He let out a long breath, his mind heavy, his body tense, because everything about tonight felt unreal. He had come here for quiet, for peace, for a weekend of solitude. Yet now he was standing in the middle of a storm he hadn't asked for, groceries forgotten. The weight of Karen's words still cutting into him like blades. He turned slowly toward her. She hadn't left. She was still there, standing near the edge of his driveway, her arms crossed tightly, her phone clutched like a weapon. Her eyes locked on him with a fire that looked less like victory now and more like desperation. Her voice was sharp when she spoke. You think this is over, don't you? You think those officers leaving means you're in the clear? You're not. You're never in the clear, not when you're hiding people in that cabin. And the man's jaw clenched, his voice low. I wasn't hiding anyone, and you know it. You've twisted this whole thing into something it's not. But Karen only shook her head, her smirk flickering back like a dying flame. You're lying. I've been watching. I've seen her here before, late at night, slipping through the trees. I told the board something was going on but they never listened, so I did what had to be done. I made the call. Her words sank deep into his chest, twisting. How had she known? If what she said was true, if she had seen the woman before, then that meant his friend had been coming here behind his back, using the cabin as a refuge without ever telling him. His mind swirled, betrayal mixing with fear. But before he could respond, Karen leaned closer, her voice lower now, almost taunting. You don't even realize who you're involved with, do you? You don't know what she's running from, you don't know what you've stepped into. But I do, and trust me, you're not ready for it. The man's stomach dropped, the lake wind cold against his skin. Her words carried a weight that made his blood run colder. It wasn't just her usual gossip or HOA threats. There was something deeper, something she wasn't saying out loud. He took a step toward her, his fists clenched. What do you know, Karen? What are you not telling me? But she only smiled faintly, tilting her head. Oh, you'll find out soon enough. You'll see just how dangerous it is to shelter people you don't understand. With that, she turned sharply on her heel, walking back toward her house with stiff, angry steps, leaving him standing there in the dim light of his porch, his mind racing. He finally picked up the bag of groceries from the truck, his hands trembling as he carried them inside. The cabin felt hollow, haunted, as though her presence still lingered in the walls. The faint sound of her whisper still echoing in the guest room. He set the bag down on the table and sat heavily in a chair, his head in his hands. The word federal protection echoed in his mind. Why would his friend be under that kind of status? What danger had she been running from? And why had she chosen his cabin as her hiding place? Was it chance? Or was it because she trusted him more than anyone else? He wanted to believe the latter. But Karen's smirk haunted him. She had been so confident. So sure, too sure for this to be mere luck. She had known something, and the thought that she was connected somehow to the reason his friend was hiding made his skin crawl. Outside, the lake remained calm. But the man couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were still on him, hidden in the dark, waiting. He locked every door and window, checked them twice. then sat back in silence, the night pressing down heavy, every creak of the wood making him flinch. Karen had started something tonight that wouldn't end easily, and as he sat staring at the darkened guest room door, he realized the biggest question wasn't why his friend had been there. It was why Karen wanted her found so badly, because her obsession wasn't just about HOA rules anymore, it was about secrets, dangerous secrets, and somehow, his cabin had become the stage for them to unravel. The man barely slept that night. Every sound outside pulled him from the edge of rest. Every whisper of wind across the lake made his eyes snap open. He kept replaying everything in his head, Karen's smirk, the trembling figure in his cabin, the word federal echoing from the officer's radio. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the walls as though they might give him answers, but none came. Only questions that grew heavier. When dawn finally broke and the first pale light slid across the lake, he stepped outside, the air damp and cool, the world quiet again. But it was the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a pause, like the world was holding its breath, as if waiting for the next blow. He looked across the road and saw Karen's blinds shift, just barely. She was awake, watching. He knew she wouldn't stop, she never did. And now, with last night's drama, she had more reason than ever to keep her eyes glued to him. He clenched his jaw and walked down to the water, trying to calm his mind. But it didn't help. Every ripple reminded him of how close his life had come to shattering. When he turned back toward the cabin, he saw something strange. A black car parked just beyond the bend, unmarked, windows tinted. He hadn't noticed it before. His stomach sank. Was it just someone lost? Or was it connected to the woman? He walked slowly back up the path, his eyes fixed on the car, but before he could step closer, the engine started and it rolled away, disappearing down the road without a trace. The man stood frozen, his pulse quick. Karen's front door opened suddenly. She stepped out in her robe, her coffee mug steaming in her hand, her eyes locked on him with that same satisfied glint. "Strange visitors so early in the morning," she said loudly enough for her words to carry. "Seems like trouble always finds your cabin." The man's fists curled. "You don't know what you're talking about, Karen." But she only sipped her coffee and smirked. "Oh, I know enough," she whispered, then turned back inside, leaving him standing in the cold morning air with the weight of her words pressing down hard. Later that day, as the sun rose higher, he received a knock on the door, not from Karen, not from a neighbor, but from two men in plain suits. Badges flashed quickly before they spoke, their tone sharp. "We need to ask you some questions about last night." He stepped aside hesitantly, letting them in, his hands clammy. They sat at his table, pulling out small notepads. One of them leaned forward. "How long has she been staying here?" The man shook his head. "I didn't know she was here until the police found her. She's an old friend, but I swear, I didn't know." The men exchanged a look, their eyes hard. The second one asked, "Did anyone else know she was here? Anyone who might have tipped someone off?" The man's throat tightened. Karen's face immediately flashed in his mind, her smug words, her confidence. He hesitated before saying, "The HOA president, Karen. She's been watching me for months. She was the one who called the police. She knew something was going on." The men scribbled notes, their eyes narrowing. "We'll look into her," one said flatly. "But for your own sake, you need to be careful. People who get too close to her don't stay safe for long." The man's chest tightened. "What are you saying? Is Karen connected to this?" But they didn't answer directly. They only stood, closing their notepads, their tone final. "Stay alert, and don't talk about this with anyone else." Then they were gone, just like that, leaving the man standing in his own kitchen with more questions than answers. He looked through the window, across the road, and there she was again, Karen at her window, watching him with eyes that burned like fire. She raised her mug in a mocking toast, as if daring him to try to figure out how deep. Her hands were in all of this, and for the first time, the man realized Karen wasn't just a neighbor hungry for drama. She was part of something far bigger, something dangerous, and she had dragged him into the middle of it with one phone call. The lake looked calm, but under the surface he could feel it. The storm was still building, and he wasn't sure how long he could hold on before it consumed him completely. That night the man sat in his cabin with every light turned off, staring out the window toward Karen's house where a faint glow slipped through her curtains. His mind would not rest. The words from the men in suits kept replaying. "People who get too close to her don't stay safe for long." He wondered how deep Karen's connection went, what exactly she knew. and why she had pushed so hard to expose the woman hiding inside his cabin. Outside the lake was black glass, the trees swayed softly, but his nerves were stretched so tight that every creak in the wood and every crunch in the gravel outside made his pulse quicken. Near midnight he heard it, the sound of footsteps, not bold but careful, circling near his porch. He moved slowly, not wanting to make noise, and peeked through the thin curtain. His heart froze. A figure stood in the shadows, not Karen, taller, broader, moving with intent. The man reached instinctively for the flashlight by the door but stopped. Afraid to reveal he was watching, the figure lingered, scanning the cabin, then slipped back into the trees. Vanishing as quietly as he had come, the man backed away from the window, his breathing heavy. This was no random visitor. Someone else was watching him now, not just Karen. The realization made his chest feel heavy. He sat in silence until the first hint of dawn. When he finally dared to step outside, the gravel near his porch showed fresh tracks, heavy boots, not his, not a neighbor's. Someone had been here, close enough to reach his door. As he studied the prints, he felt eyes on him again. He turned his head sharply and there she was, Karen, standing at the edge of her yard with her robe pulled tight, her eyes fixed on him with a strange smile. "Rough night?" she asked in a voice too sweet to be real. He glared back. "Someone was here, sneaking around my cabin. You know anything about that?" But she only tilted her head and whispered, "Some things are bigger than you, bigger than this lake. You should have thought about that before you sheltered her." His stomach dropped. His voice shook with anger. "You called the police on me. You set this up. You've dragged me into something I don't even understand." But she only smirked wider. "Dragged you? No, you were already in it. You just didn't know." Her words hit him like ice water. She turned and walked back to her porch, her figure swallowed by the early light, leaving him stunned. Later that day the men in suits returned, their expressions hard, their tone urgent. "Did anyone unusual approach your property last night?" they asked, and the man told them about the figure in the shadows. Their jaws tightened. They exchanged a look that said more than their words. "They are looking for her," one of them muttered, "and if they think you're connected, they won't stop." The man demanded answers. "Who's looking for her? Why was she hiding here? What do you know about Karen?" But the men only shook their heads. "That woman across the road, keep your distance. She's not just nosy, she has ties, the wrong kind of ties." Then they left again, leaving the man with more dread than relief. As the sun dipped low once more, the lake glimmering in red, he sat on his porch, staring at Karen's house. The blinds shifted again, just slightly, and he knew she was still watching, always watching. And in that moment it struck him. Karen hadn't just stumbled on his friend. She had known exactly who she was. Maybe even why she was hiding, and the way she had smirked when the police dragged her out of his cabin proved it. Karen wasn't just a neighbor with power in the HOA. She was connected to the very danger his friend was running from. And the man understood with a sick twist in his gut that as long as Karen lived across the road, he wasn't dealing with a simple feud anymore. He was living next to the enemy. The evening fell heavy on the lake as clouds gathered thick, shadows swallowing the cabins. One by one, the man sat alone on his porch, his eyes never leaving the dim light in Karen's window, his heart steady but his mind storming. He knew something was coming. He could feel it in the air, a kind of pressure that made his skin crawl. When the knock came on his door it was not loud but deliberate. He rose slowly, every step toward the door feeling heavier. When he opened it, two figures stood there, not police this time. Not the men in suits he had seen before, but strangers in dark coats, their faces sharp, their eyes cold. One of them spoke in a low steady tone. "We know she was here. Tell us where she is now." The man's stomach twisted. He shook his head firmly. "I don't know where she is. They took her last night. That's all I know." But the taller man stepped closer, his shadow spilling into the cabin. "We don't believe you, and if you don't start talking, things will get ugly, fast." Fear pricked at his chest but he stood his ground. "Check with the police. Check with whoever you want. I had nothing to do with this." Suddenly a voice cut through the tension from across the road, sharp and familiar. Enough, he's telling the truth. It was Karen, stepping out from her yard, her robe gone, replaced with dark clothes, her posture straight, her voice carrying authority he had never heard from her before. The men turned toward her instantly, as if they had expected her, as if she was the reason they were here. The man's eyes widened in shock. "Karen, what is this? Who are they?" But she didn't look at him. She looked only at the strangers. "You're too late. They moved her already, and you won't find her here again. The shorter man scowled. You assured us she was here. Karen crossed her arms. And she was. I delivered her, didn't I? The fact that your people were too slow isn't my problem. The man's blood ran cold, every piece snapping into place at once. Karen hadn't just been meddling. She had been working with them. She had known about his friend from the start. She had used him, used his cabin, used the police, to flush her out. The tall stranger stepped closer to Karen, his tone dangerous. If she slips away because of you, there will be consequences. But Karen only smiled. That same smug smile he had seen 100 times before. Don't threaten me, I've held up my end, and you know it. She's gone now. But she won't stay hidden forever. She'll come back, and when she does, I'll know first. The men exchanged a dark glance, then turned away, walking back into the shadows without another word, disappearing down the road like they had never been there, leaving only Karen standing in the glow of her porch light. She looked across the street at the man, their eyes locking, her smile curling wider. Now you see, she whispered, her voice carrying across the silence. This was never about the HOA, it was never about rules, it was about her, and you were foolish enough to stand in the middle of it. The man's chest heaved, fury burning hot in his veins. You set me up, you endangered everyone here. Why, Karen, why are you doing this? She tilted her head slightly, her eyes gleaming. Because power isn't about following rules, it's about knowing secrets. And I know hers, I know yours, and I know how to use both. Then she turned slowly and disappeared into her house, closing the door with a finality that made the night feel heavier than ever. The man stood frozen on his porch, the weight of truth pressing down like an anchor. Karen wasn't just a neighbor with too much authority. She was part of something larger, something dangerous, and now she had shown him just enough to make him understand how deep her ties really went. The lake was quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet he once loved. It was the silence of a battlefield waiting for the next shot. And as he stepped back into his darkened cabin, locking the door behind him, he realized that Karen's words weren't just a threat. They were a promise, and the real war for his home, his life, and his friend's safety had only just begun.